what aquifers are they connected to? And how does that relate to the hydrology underneath Penokee Mountains? You know, and I was reading a book on the history of La Pointe, you know, and they talked about 150 feet off of Grants Point back in around 1950, they observed a well at a pretty deep depth. And they could tell that it was an underground spring at the bottom of Lake Superior because it had actually formed about a 12-foot deep pit in the bottom of the lake. When they dropped a thermometer down there, I forget exactly how it went. It was like the lake temp near the surface was 68 degrees. It was a little less than that at the bottom of the bed of Lake Superior, and they dropped that down in the well, and it was like 48 degrees. 12-foot difference in elevation, but that spring was way, you know, obviously a lot colder. Where is that well coming from? Where is that spring connected to? And you know, in our, and this isn't science, but I'm just going to say it unapologetically, like a Republican would. Our ceremonies and our teachings tell us that those things are all interconnected under there. That Bijou, lake spirit, knows how to get to the Penokees and Caroline Lake, and he does that through aquifers, right? Our elders tell us that stuff through ceremony, and it's probably not going to stand the test of time in a scientific debate, but exploiting the headwaters of your home safely is supposed to stand the test of time in a scientific debate, right? And the other thing I just want to say really quickly is the dynamic of our home here, our home, all of us, is those Penokees have a very important role that they're playing for the big lake in the sense that it's about the rocks just as much as it is about the water. And I'm not talking about sulfuric acid and sulfates and things like that. All of those things are locked away safely right now in their home, in their rightful place, right? Been that way for a billion years. What's currently happening right now in the Penokees is an unbelievably efficient injection system of cold, clean water into Lake Superior. It's just like a syringe almost, when you think about that, you know? And that just, boom, those rocks don't keep water around, they don't soak up water. In fact, we want to see how efficient they are in pushing that water away. After a rain event, go visit Copper Falls State Park and check out how that water is crashing through some of those waterfalls, right? Deltas, Gorge, and places like that. Those rocks play a role in taking care of everything downstream by nature of the injection system that they represent. Whoosh. Where does that water slow down? Where does it start to percolate? Where does it start to stick around a little bit and feed things and create life? In the 40% of the coastal wetlands that border up and turn into Lake Superior. And so let's flip that. Let's flip that for a second by exploding all that area up there and unleashing all those toxicities. The waterways, the primary integrity of the Tyler Fork system is still going to be intact. And so now we have this syringe that becomes just like the meth and heroin scourge in our communities, right? Now we have this lethal injection system that is taking all that toxicity and going whoosh right down into the downstream areas below it. And of course that happens to be our home. And into Lake Superior. Those rocks are a critical factor from a temperature standpoint, but they're also an unbelievably critical factor in that scenario of releasing and transporting toxicity. And where is that going to be accounted for in GTAC's findings? Where's that going to be accounted for in how we look at this stuff? And I'm going to tell you who told me about that stuff. It was an old lady that sat down and visited me in a dream. And she said, water is life. But don't forget about Mishomas, those grandfathers, those giant Mishomas up there. And when I sat at Ripper Falls, at Ren Falls, I finally realized I see these things as a living entity, these big rocks. And they took Tyler Forks, they squinched it right down, they lifted it right up in the air, the whole river, like a cord running through your hands. Lifted Tyler Forks right up in the air, and like a little kid trying to figure this stuff out, I talked to my main man, Cyrus Hester, who many of you may know. And we wish him the best. Is he still here? I love that guy. Not just because he looks like Brad Pitt either. but we talked at length about the aeration factor. You know, you go buy a goldfish. Everybody knows you go buy a goldfish and you can't take that goldfish home and throw him in tap water. He'll die. There's something magic that happens when you look at what the Penokees and Allie systems provide and how they care for the whole web of life, let alone a little fish, right? And you take an aquarium and you look at what's up in the top of a corner of an aquarium, keeping everything alive in that whole box. And there's this little thing that looks like Ripper Falls. And look at this little thing that looks like Devil's Gorge. That looks like Copper Falls State Park waterways. That looks like all those unnamed waterfalls that are up in the Penokees. And you realize that, holy man, these Noshomas are lifting all that water up and creating all these thousands of aeration areas. And then they're throwing it off that mountainside down to us really quickly. Good, clean, magical water that keeps the web of life alive. And those rocks are just as important as the water that they transport. So I wanted to just say that. To that end, I know Penokee Pete's pushing Larry Lynch right now on the notion that, the mining companies being very cooperative and they're doing everything we ask, because that's a talking point that's in the media right now from the state DNR. And in our mining consultation meeting, I had Scott Gunderson, Kathy Stepp, and Ann Coakley sitting in front of me and sitting in front of all the tribal leaders. And I had Ann Coakley, go back up, I had Kathy Stepp saying, my job is to make sure that my staff have all the resources and all the information they need to do a good job. And I decided not to act out Kathy Stepp that right there, but she put forward that point. And then within 5 minutes, I had Ann Coakley telling me they have unsuccessfully requested core samples from GTAC on at least 3 or 4 times at that point. And so my question that I asked was, Secretary Stepp, if your job is to get your staff everything you need so they can do a good, solid job with all the information that's important to protect the public, I said, how come your main regulatory person sitting here saying she's unsuccessfully requested core samples? And the response, of course, is that's not required by law. And then the rest of the story gets kind of ugly. But it was an intense and very crucial consultation that illuminated exactly who's in the driver's seat as far as bringing science to the table. And who's in the driver's seat as far as running a covert operation. And it's the mining company, of course. So
I think when it comes to wetlands, the Corps of Engineers is going to have a very critical role. And the Wetlands Association and all the work that has been done is going to end up contradicting this company, which has a history of denying the science, ignoring the reality, pretending they can fix a problem and then not talking about it. It was geologists who said there's grunerite and asbestos form in the rocks up there. It was the DNR staff who, by the way, pointed out that there was grunerite in their borings, and the company continues to deny that it's still there. So the more scientific-based information you can provide, it's going to put them on the defensive and make it harder and harder for them to make their case to EPA and the Corps of Engineers. Believe me, this isn't going to be easy. I mean, there are mining projects around this country that have been approved, that have some real questionable significant impact on our natural resources. But I think, again, we look at Pebble Mine, we look at that Bristol Bay watershed, we know the Bad River watershed. You've got to elevate the importance of the Bad River watershed to Lake Superior, to our waterways in the state of Wisconsin, just as they did up there. And I'm convinced that when people see the science, they know the Penokees, they know the beauty of the land, the fragility of the ecosystem, the right conclusions will be reached. But it's going to take a lot of hard work.
I'd like to lean, if I could, Glenn, could I lean on you a little bit? In the Cranon, was it the Cranon fight where the water hydrology models were about 7 or 8 years old when science discovered that everything was wrong?
A scenario here with different politics. It's wonderful that there's so much opposition to this mine locally, because in Crandon, it was hard to find anyone except Mole Lake that opposed it. Well, one thing that did happen is that after the application was filed, the Army Corps did its analysis of water and the impact off to assess trust responsibility. And the DNR focused on, the narrower view. And this is the trick of science, because no one knew what was going to happen. And ultimately, the draft environmental impact statement said just that. And one of the real challenges is that Western science is reductionist. So you have hydrologists who look at groundwater, or hydrologists that look at surface water, you have hydrogeologists that look at groundwater, and there is no model that links both. What you said is groundwater becomes surface water becomes groundwater, but there's no hydrologists and hydrogeologists don't communicate on the same level. So the experiment proved by the Army Corps spending $1 million on a model that failed and contradicted what the DNR came up with, and ultimately Glyphwood played such an important role of just asking questions and pointing out difficulties until the individual at the DNR who was very concerned about his responsibility representing the agency of making a bad decision. Chris Carlson, I don't know if you know him, if you've run into him, but ultimately, it was his connection, I think, with understanding what was at stake that slowed the process down to such a point that GTEC felt it needed to not let that happen again. But the science is weak in stuff like this. It is a joke. It's the best we can do for prediction, but it proved itself a failure, I think, in the end. To answer the question.
Great comment, yeah. And it's also why it's so important what Mike is doing with the 404C, getting that science, as flawed as it is sometimes, out of the company, out of that control. We can't be reacting to things that are going to be, if they're going to do studies and only give us the little bit of information they want us to know, that's not science. So we've got to get that moved away. We've got to get other entities saying, we're looking at this independent of anything else, and is this even the right place to ever even begin to think about such an activity? And that's the right approach. So hopefully we'll succeed on that. And our organization is writing a letter to EPA in support as well. So important stuff.